In the dust-bitten corner of the frontier, a widow and her 5 boys were sold at auction. They were nothing but names on a paper, their hearts wrapped in silence. But when a dying stranger collapsed at their fence line, bleeding and broken, they brought him in with nothing to give but hope. What they didn't know was who he really was and what he was running from. This isn't just a story about saving a man. It's about how that man would save them all. One bullet, one secret, and one promise at a time. The sun in Grayson Gulch didn't shine. It blistered. It leaned heavy against the buildings, cracking paint and drying men's lips before they could finish a sentence. Dust spun in lazy whirlwinds across the square, settling in boots, in eyes, and in regrets. They'd posted the auction notice at dawn. By mid-morning, the crowd had gathered like vultures circling a wounded thing. Not for cattle, not for tools or land, but for something far crueler. A family. Mara Vexley stood tall despite the ache in her back and the weight of 5 frightened souls clinging to her skirt. Her dark hair had loosened from its bun, framing a face marked not by age, but by hardship. Her eyes, clear as riverstone, held no tears. Just fury, dignity, and an unspoken warning. Look, but don't touch. The boys were quiet. Boaz, the eldest at 16, tried to look unbothered, one arm protectively around his brother, Callan. Ephraim and Thorne stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes narrowed at the crowd. Jude, the youngest, no more than 5, wrapped himself around Mara's leg like a vine. The banker stood beside the auctioneer, both men grown fat off of someone else's labor. Their smiles were tight, formal, but they knew this wasn't just business. This was a spectacle. Debt repayment, the banker called it. Owed and unpaid per Property Law Title 16, subsection 4. The crowd didn't care for the law. They cared for curiosity. They wanted to see if anyone would be fool enough to bid on a woman and 5 mouths to feed. Mara didn't flinch when they called her name. She stepped up onto the platform as though stepping into a church, shoulders square, chin high. If she was going to be sold, she'd let them choke on the price of her pride. The first bid was low, from a man who had never married but fancied himself owed a little companionship by now. Laughter rippled when he raised his hand with a crooked grin. Another man followed. "Less for the woman, more for the able-bodied boys," he muttered. "Help around the fields." Boaz tensed. Mara rested a hand on his shoulder. Not yet, she thought. Not here. Then silence. From the far end of the crowd, a figure shifted. He hadn't spoken, hadn't even moved since arriving. Edric Kane stood with his hat tilted low, arms crossed over his long coat, his face shadowed and unreadable. Some recognized him, most just whispered. He didn't talk much, didn't come to town unless it was necessary. Folks knew he kept to himself on a stretch of land up against Black Hollow Ridge. Said he had once been someone important. Others said he'd buried his past under every fence post on his ranch. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "We have 2 bids. Do I hear a third?" And that's when Kane moved. He stepped forward with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had no fear of attention. His boots hit the planks with weight. He reached into his coat and, for a flicker of a moment, everyone froze. Sheriff Ruel Maddox even put a hand near his holster. But Kane didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a leather pouch. It hit the bidding table with a heavy thud, dust puffing up around it. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The banker peeked inside and blinked twice. That'll cover it." The auctioneer's voice cracked. "Sold. To Mr. Kane." Mara didn't move. Neither did Kane. The crowd murmured. Some muttered words like crazy and damn fool. Others just stared. In all the years Grayson Gulch had held auctions of land, animals, or people, no one had bid so quickly or without question. Kane stepped aside as the auctioneer gestured them down. Mara gathered her boys, helping them off the platform one by one. When she reached the bottom, she looked Kane in the eye. For a moment, the world went quiet. Not a thank you, not a question, just a look. It was the kind of look that said, "I don't need saving, but I'm smart enough to walk away from drowning." Kane gave a single nod and turned without a word. They followed. The wagon ride back to the ranch was long, silent, and dry. Kane didn't make small talk. He didn't ask questions. He just drove the team like he'd done it 1,000 times, his eyes steady on the trail ahead. The boys sat in the back, shifting uncomfortably on the wooden boards. Mara held Jude in her lap. The wind pulled at their hair. Dust clung to their faces. Eventually, Callan whispered, "Is he going to make us work?" Boaz whispered back, "Everyone works. But will he hit us?" Mara hushed them both. "No one lays a hand on you unless I'm dead." She didn't know if that was true, but she meant it. The ranch appeared like a memory rising from the dust. It wasn't big, but it was well kept. A 2-story house with a front porch, a barn off to the side, and a few fenced pastures filled with stubborn, lean cattle. No servants, no help, just land and silence. Kane helped Jude down from the wagon gently, like someone who remembered how. Then he unloaded their few belongings, wordlessly nodding toward the house. Inside, the rooms were clean but cold. The fireplace hadn't seen a flame in weeks. A kettle sat dry on the stove. "Bed's upstairs," he said, gesturing once. The boys ran to explore. Mara stood in the doorway, uncertain. Then Kane did something unexpected. He lit the fire, not with a quick strike of a match, but with care. One hand cradled the kindling, the other shielding the flame. When the fire caught, he stepped back. Only then did Mara step fully into the room. That night no one spoke. But as the wind howled outside and coyotes cried on distant ridges, the Vexley family slept in a stranger's house, wrapped in wool blankets that had been left out on every bed, the faint scent of cedar still clinging to the walls. And Edric Kane sat outside in the rocking chair, a rifle resting across his lap. He didn't know what he'd just done. He only knew he couldn't watch another family get taken by the world. Not again. The first morning on Kane's ranch arrived before the sun. A gray-blue light crept through the cracks in the shutters, and a chill hung in the air like an unspoken warning. Mara rose before her sons, her body aching, her mind racing. She moved through the unfamiliar rooms like a ghost, touching nothing, expecting at any moment to be told she'd overstepped. Downstairs, the fire was embers, but kindling was stacked neatly beside it, as if left for her on purpose. Outside, the land stretched wide and wild, backed by the dark spine of Black Hollow Ridge. She saw him then, Edric Kane, already at the well, drawing water with practiced silence. He didn't look up. He simply filled 2 buckets, placed one at her feet, and carried the other to the barn. That silence would become a language between them. The boys adjusted in their own ways. Boaz, always the protector, immediately started looking for work to do. Callan followed his older brother, mimicking his serious posture. The younger twins, Ephraim and Thorn, explored cautiously, half expecting a harsh word that never came. Only Jude, the youngest, seemed to settle in quickly. He was too young to carry the weight of what they'd lost. More than once, Mara found him sitting just a few feet from Edric, while the man whittled by lamplight. Neither of them would speak, but they didn't seem to need to. That night, Mara stood in the kitchen doorway. The boys were finally eating a full meal. She watched Kane refill a chipped mug with black coffee, his movements slow, measured, like a man who had spent too long doing things alone. "You always this quiet?" she asked. Kane looked at her. A long, unblinking pause. "Mostly," he said. The word was heavy, like it was carrying something it didn't want to put down. "I don't like guessing," she said. "You plan on putting my boys to work. You can say it plain." He shook his head slowly. "Not yet." "And me?" He sipped his coffee. "You'll know when." Then he stood and walked outside into the dark, leaving her with more questions than answers. By the 3rd day, the rhythm of the place began to seep into them. The boys rose early, helping with feed and muck without being told. Kane never gave orders. He simply showed them once, and they followed. The land itself seemed to be the teacher. But there were scars on the property, not fresh ones, but old. A split-rail fence repaired with mismatched wood, a patch of earth behind the barn that looked like it had been turned, not for crops, but for a memory. On the sixth day, a rider came. Sheriff Ruel Maddox. He didn't dismount, just sat in his saddle, his eyes scanning the property. Kane met him at the hitching post. Mara couldn't hear the words, but she could read a face. Maddox was delivering a warning. His jaw was tight, his hand resting near his gun. Kane didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just listened. Then he tipped his hat. Maddox rode away, dust curling behind him like smoke. That night Mara found Kane by the barn. "What did the sheriff want?" Kane was tightening a strap on a saddle. "Said Judd Varing's looking for you." Mara's stomach turned. Judd Varing. The name alone made her skin crawl. The land baron who had claimed her husband's life and nearly taken her son's. "He'll come here?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Kane didn't answer. She stepped closer. "You knew when you bid on us, didn't you?" He looked at her, not coldly, not kindly, just honestly. "Yes." "Why?" He stared past her, toward the ridge where dusk was bleeding into the sky. "Because I've seen what men like him leave behind." She didn't ask more, and he didn't offer more. But in that moment, Mara Vexley understood something vital. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a fortress. And the war had just followed them to the front gate. The sheriff's visit lingered in the air like the promise of a storm. Mara felt it. So did Kane. The silence on the ranch was different now, heavier, more watchful. On the seventh morning, Kane rode out before dawn, alone. No word of where he was going. Mara watched from the porch, her heart tight with a fear she couldn't name. He didn't return by noon. By sunset, she was preparing for the worst. Then she heard hooves. It was Sheriff Maddox, riding slow. Trailing behind him on a second horse, roped and slouched, was another man. His face was a mess of bruises and blood. A man who worked for Judd Varing. "Ma'am," Maddox said, tipping his hat. "Just delivering a message." He gestured to the beaten man. "This one was sent to scout your land. Took a wrong turn into your south fence." Kane caught him. Boaz stepped out onto the porch. "Is he alive?" "Lucky to be," Maddox said. "Kane could have left him in the ravine." Mara narrowed her eyes. "Why bring him here?" Maddox slid off his horse. "Kane told me to deliver two things. One, this man. And two, his words." "What words?" The sheriff adjusted his hat, his eyes avoiding hers. He said, "Tell Varing I'm not scared of ghosts. I've buried worse." The message hung in the air, cold and sharp. Boaz looked at his mother. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer, because she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Edric returned after dark, a fresh gash on his collar and dust thick on his boots. He didn't speak as he walked past the house, just tipped his head toward Mara and went to stable the horse. She waited for him by the fire. When he finally stepped inside, she handed him a mug of coffee. "You know this won't stop him," she said softly. "No," he replied. "It won't." "You planning to fight him alone?" Kane stared into the flames. "Wasn't planning on anything." "Then what are you doing?" He sipped the coffee, let the warmth coat his throat. "Living." "You've got 5 boys under this roof now," she said, "and a woman who won't be sold again." He looked up at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I know." She didn't press him further because she finally understood. This wasn't just about her or the boys or even Varing. This was about something Kane had lost long ago, something he was no longer willing to lose again. The next morning, the boys woke to something new. Kane was in the barn, laying out gear, not just farm tools, ropes, an axe, a shovel, and a small rifle. "Training day," he said, his voice flat. He nodded toward the tools. "Y'all need to know how to defend what's yours." Boaz grinned. Callan whooped. Even Ephraim puffed out his chest. Mara watched from the kitchen window, unsure whether to smile or to pray. That day, the sound of rifle cracks echoed from the back pasture. Not wild shots, but measured, controlled. By sundown, the boys were sweaty, sore, and proud. Boaz could reload with surprising speed. Thorne could throw a rope better than most grown men. And Kane. He said almost nothing, but he watched them with eyes that had softened just a little, like a man remembering how to care. That evening, Mara found a folded scrap of paper by her plate. No signature. It was a crude map. A note was scrawled at the bottom. Varing's men camp 2 miles east. They ride soon. She turned it over. The other side was blank. Who had sent it? Edric didn't say a word about it, but that night he oiled his rifle twice and sat with his back to the door. The wind shifted 2 days later. Not just the usual kind of wind that pulled dust through the cracks. No, this wind carried something sharper. It whistled through the canyon like it was whispering the names of men long buried and warning of those who would soon follow. "They're close," Mara said that night, finding Kane cleaning his rifle on the porch. He didn't nod, didn't speak, but she knew he agreed. The next day, Boaz found fresh tracks by the creek. "Horses," he said, his voice low. "Maybe 6 of them." "Scouts," Kane murmured. "Testing distance, timing, looking for a weakness." Mara stepped closer. "Did they find any?" "Not yet." Then, that evening, they saw it. A thin plume of cook smoke rising from the east ridge. "They're here," Kane said. No fear in his voice, just a fact. He didn't ride out. He didn't shoot first. He just waited. Because the worst kind of danger wasn't the one that kicked down your door. It was the kind that watched and waited and struck when you blinked. The boys barely slept. Boaz sat by the window, rifle across his lap. Mara didn't sleep at all. She stood in the doorway until dawn, watching the ridge, watching her boys, and watching Kane. Because even if he didn't say it, he was preparing to die. Not because he wanted to, but because he had decided, somewhere deep in that stone, silent soul, that no man would take what he had just begun to protect. Then, on the 5th night, the storm came. Thunder rolled over the ridge like drums before a battle. Rain hammered the roof. And in a brilliant flash of lightning, they saw them. 5 riders on the hill. Black outlines on dark horses watching the house. Mara saw them. So did Kane. He didn't reach for his gun. He stood on the porch in the pouring rain, his jaw set like the edge of a blade. He didn't blink. Neither did they. For nearly an hour they stood in that silent standoff. Then, one by one, the riders turned and vanished into the trees. Kane finally stepped back inside, soaked and worn. Mara was waiting. "What now?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but alive. "We dig in." The next morning, something had changed. Not just the land, not just the boys, but Kane himself. Something behind his eyes had come back to life. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fear. It was the memory of another time, another stand, another family he couldn't protect. But this one was not going to be taken. Not while he still had breath. Mara knew Judd Varing was coming, but he wasn't going to find a broken widow and 5 scared boys. He was going to find a fortress. And a man who had 6 reasons not to break again. The air that morning was crisp and unnaturally quiet. This was the silence of a land holding its breath. The boys rose without being called, moving with a solemnness no child should ever carry. Kane was gone. No note, no sound. But Mara knew where he was. She found him at the edge of Hollow Ridge, sitting on an old stump, his rifle laid across his lap. The sky behind him was streaked with gray. "They're coming," she said, sitting beside him. "I figured," he said finally. "Are you ready?" He shrugged. "No one's ever ready, but I'm not running if that's what you mean." He stood and slung the rifle over his shoulder. "I'm not dying for anyone," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "I'm living for something. First time in a long while." By midday, the riders were in sight. 7 of them. At their front rode Judd Varing himself, tall and cruel in the saddle, a smug smile on his face. He halted at the fence line. "Mara Vexley, I'm here to collect what's mine." Mara stood on the porch, arms folded, with Boaz and Callan flanking her. You lost that right when you sold us like cattle, she called back. Vering smiled. Doesn't matter what the papers say, girl. You were property, your boys too, and the man hiding behind your skirts doesn't have the law on his side. A shadow moved behind the barn. Kane stepped out, calm and still. You come a step closer, he said, his voice flat, and I'll plant you right here. Vering chuckled. You think you can hold off 7 men? No, Kane said. But I only need to stop you. Vering dismounted. You threatening me, Kane? No, I'm warning you. The others laughed, but they stopped when Kane raised his rifle and fired. The bullet missed Vering by inches, striking the saddle behind him. The sound shattered the moment, and all hell broke loose. The first rider charged the porch. Boaz fired, hitting him in the shoulder. The man screamed and fell. Callan dropped to one knee and reloaded. Ephraim flung open the barn door, letting the horses free in a stampede of thunder that scattered 2 more riders. Kane moved like lightning, dropping another man near the water trough. His movements weren't angry. They were precise. He was fighting like a man defending his very soul. Vering shouted a command, but it didn't matter, because Mara had stepped off the porch, and she was carrying fire. She lit the fuse on a bottle of kerosene and hurled it at the wagon behind the remaining riders. The explosion sent flames roaring into the sky. Panic spread like wildfire. Kane closed the distance with Vering, and suddenly it was just the 2 of them. Old blood, new grudge. Vering drew his pistol. Kane dropped his rifle and lunged. They collided hard. Fists, knees, curses flying. Vering was younger, but Kane had the kind of strength born from dragging grief uphill for years. He drove a fist so deep into Vering's ribs that the man crumpled. Vering spat blood. You don't win, Kane. You just slow it down. Kane stood over him, breathing hard, then turned and walked away. By dusk, the fight was over. The boy sat on the porch steps, bruised but beaming. Mara was in the kitchen, wrapping Kane's arm where a blade had caught him. You could have killed him, she whispered. Kane didn't flinch. Wouldn't have helped. What happens now? He looked at her, his eyes tired but alive. Now, he said, we rebuild. Together. She didn't say anything, she just nodded. And for the first time since her husband died, since she stood on that auction block, she felt safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because they were facing it together. Weeks passed. The wounds began to heal, not just the ones stitched by thread, but the deeper ones. The ranch still bore the scars of battle, but they weren't things to hide. They were proof they had survived. Mara stood on the porch one morning, a mug of coffee in her hands, watching the sunrise. Behind her, the house buzzed softly with life. The boys were laughing. She walked inside and found Kane at the table. His arm was still bandaged, but his shoulders were lighter, his jaw less tight. There was a warmth in him now, cautious, but real. The sheriff came by again, she said. Kane raised an eyebrow. Says Vering's gone. Left the territory. No charges filed, but no more threats either. Kane nodded, then finally spoke. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you make out of the broken pieces. She looked at him. Really looked at him. And in that moment, everything that had happened, the auction, the storm, the fire, the pain, it all settled like dust. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a family. Later that evening, they all gathered for supper under the stars. Laughter rang out like music. Jude, the youngest, sat next to Kane, swinging his legs. When the meal was done, the boys drifted off to chase fireflies. Kane stayed on the porch, a pipe in his hand. Mara joined him. So this is it? She asked. He shrugged. For now. You plan on staying? He looked at her, not just at her face, but at all of her. Unless you plan on kicking me out? She smiled. I tried that once. It didn't work. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the night. Then Jude called from the grass, his voice high and clear. Pa! Look! I caught a frog! Kane turned his head slowly. Pa! He repeated the word under his breath. Mara saw the moment. felt the weight of it. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think I finally am." As the stars burned brighter over Hollow Ridge, Kane sat alone for a long while, thinking not about what he'd lost, but what he'd found. He didn't know how long it would last. Life had a way of taking back what it gave. But tonight, there was peace. And for a man like Edric Kane, that was enough. Some stories don't end in gunfire. They end in breath, in bread shared under the stars, in a child's whisper of hope where there used to be only silence. Maybe that's the real legend of the West, not who drew first, but who stayed when it mattered. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you were moved by this story of finding family in the most unexpected of places, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the heart of the human spirit. Your support helps us keep these legends alive. The mist hung heavy over the Black Hills that morning, wreathing the pines in ghostly tendrils as Silas Winters moved silently through the forest. His weathered boots made no sound on the carpet of needles, a skill honed through years of tracking both animals and men. The Winchester rifle in his hands was worn, but immaculate. He paused, head tilting slightly. The forest had gone silent. No birdsong, no rustling of squirrels, only the soft whisper of wind through the pines. His instinct, sharpened by 5 years in this wilderness, screamed a warning. 20 paces ahead, he found the reason. She lay half-hidden among fallen leaves, her body arranged with deliberate care. Her hands were crossed over her chest, almost peaceful, but the dark bruises encircling her throat told another story. She couldn't have been more than 20, with pale blonde hair now matted with dried blood. This wasn't his first such discovery, but something was different. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant, a bird in flight, and pinned to her tattered dress was a folded piece of paper. With gloved hands, Silas carefully removed it. 2 words were written in elegant script. "Remember St. Louis." The message wasn't for the dead woman. It was for him. A cold rage settled in Silas's chest as he pocketed the note. They knew he was here. They knew he was still hunting them. And they were sending a message in the most brutal way possible, through the body of another innocent. He searched her clothing but found nothing. Just another nameless victim. After completing his grim inspection, Silas wrapped her body in his spare blanket and lifted her with gentle reverence. He carried her deeper into the forest, to a small clearing few would ever find. 6 simple stone markers already formed a solemn row beneath the whispering pines. The 7th grave took him nearly 2 hours to dig, the physical labor a familiar ritual that gave his anger purpose. When it was deep enough, he lowered her gently into the earth. Standing over the fresh mound, Silas placed a handful of blue mountain columbine on the grave. The sleeve of his shirt rode up, revealing a faded tattoo. The eagle and shield of the Union Army, and beneath it, a puckered scar from a rebel's bayonet at Antietam. "They're getting bolder," he said to the silent forest, "leaving you where I would find you, with a message meant to shake me." He knelt beside the grave, fingers tracing the crude wooden cross he'd fashioned. "I swear on Hannah's soul I'm close now, and they know it." With one last look, Silas straightened, checked his rifle with practiced motions. 1, 2, 3, always 3, and headed back toward his cabin. His isolation in these mountains had lasted 5 years. Perhaps it was time to change tactics. There was work to be done in Deadwood. 1 week earlier, Rebecca Morgan stood at the small, cloudy mirror in her room, her fingers working to secure her dark hair into a simple bun. The blue dress she wore had been her mother's, taken in to fit her slimmer frame. It was the only decent clothing she owned. "You're wearing that?" Franklin's voice made her start. Her older brother lounged in the doorway, eyeing her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "It's all I have," Becca answered simply. Franklin sighed. "Won't matter much anyway. Caldwell's men aren't known for their interest in fashion." The casual cruelty of the remark stung. But Becca maintained her composure. At 23, she'd had years to perfect a mask of indifference. "So, it's decided then?" she asked quietly. "You and Father are really going through with this?" "We don't have a choice, Becca. The Colonel wants his money and we don't have it." Franklin's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "There's always a choice," she said, turning to face him. "You could stand up to Father, tell him selling his daughter is a line even he shouldn't cross." Franklin wouldn't meet her eyes. At 27, he had their father's height, but his face had begun to show the bloat of too much whiskey. "The debt is too large," he muttered. "And Colonel Porter isn't a man you cross." "How much?" Becca demanded. "How much am I worth to you and Father?" Franklin's jaw tightened. $50. He had the decency to flush with shame. "Plus forgiveness of the remaining debt, which is another 100. Becca gave a short, bitter laugh. $150, that's my value. Less than a good horse. It's not like that. The Golden Spike is respectable enough. Some of those girls end up marrying miners who strike it rich. And the ones who don't?" Becca stepped closer. "The ones who disappear after a few months? What happens to them, Franklin?" Her brother's face changed. A flash of genuine fear crossed his features. "Keep your voice down. Don't talk about things you don't understand." "I understand more than you think." Becca's amber eyes narrowed. "I've seen the way some of those girls look when they first arrive at the Golden Spike, and I've noticed how some of them vanish later. No one ever asks questions." "Stop it!" Franklin hissed, gripping her arm. "If Father hears you, he'll what? Sell me to the saloon?" She yanked her arm free. "Oh, wait, he's already doing that." The slap came without warning, snapping her head to the side. Franklin looked as shocked as she felt, his hand still raised as if it belonged to someone else. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Becca, I didn't mean—" She stepped back out of his reach. "You're just like him now." Footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Walter Morgan's voice boomed through the thin walls. "Is she ready?" "Wagons loaded." Becca gathered her small bundle of possessions, her mother's book of poetry, a spare dress, and a small knife she'd hidden from her father. The book was her most precious treasure. Catherine Morgan had taught her daughter to read in secret, against her husband's wishes. "Knowledge is freedom," she'd whispered to Becca, "and they can never take it from you." The memory of her mother's voice strengthened Becca's resolve. She would not go meekly. She would watch, listen, remember, and when the opportunity came, she would escape. Walter Morgan waited by the wagon, a tall man gone to seed. "Finally," he grunted as Becca emerged. "Get in, and try to look less like you're going to a funeral. Caldwell's doing us a favor taking you." "A favor?" Becca couldn't contain her bitterness. "Is that what you call selling your daughter?" Walter's eyes narrowed. "Mind your tongue, girl. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born. At least this way you'll earn your keep." The words hurt, despite the years of similar abuse. Becca climbed into the wagon in silence. But inside, in the secret chambers of her heart, she made a vow. Whatever happened, she would survive. She would find out what had happened to her mother 13 years ago. And someday, she would make Walter Morgan regret this day. The Golden Spike stood on the edge of Deadwood's mining district, its freshly painted facade a sharp contrast to the muddy street. Victor Caldwell awaited them on the steps, a tall man with oiled hair and a smile that made Becca's skin crawl. "Walter Morgan," Caldwell greeted them, his voice smooth as glass. "And this must be Rebecca." Becca kept her eyes lowered, not out of modesty, but to hide the hatred burning in them. She was using her extraordinary memory to record every detail: faces in the crowd, the layout of the street, potential escape routes. "She's as promised," Walter said gruffly. "Young, healthy, can read and write, though I never saw the use in it myself." "Educated, are we?" Caldwell lifted Becca's chin with one finger. "Look at me, girl." She met his gaze defiantly. Caldwell's eyes widened slightly at the fire in hers. Spirited, he murmured. That can be adjusted. From the crowd, someone called out, "How much you paying for that one, Vic? Don't look worth more than a bottle of rot gut." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Becca's cheeks burned. Caldwell ignored them, turning instead to address someone emerging from the saloon. "Colonel, your timing is impeccable." Colonel Harlan Porter cut an imposing figure even at 60. Tall and straight-backed, his silver hair and beard were immaculately groomed. His pale blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, moved over Becca as if cataloging merchandise. "So, this is Walter Morgan's daughter," Porter said. He circled her slowly. "Thin, but that can be remedied. Good posture, clear eyes." Becca fought the urge to spit. There was something familiar about his voice, a half-remembered conversation overheard years ago. Her father, speaking with a southern-accented man about shipments and new territories. "She'll do," Porter declared. "Mr. Caldwell, shall we conclude our business?" Caldwell nodded, producing a leather pouch. "Half now, as agreed. The remainder when she's properly established." Walter Morgan reached for the pouch, but Porter held it back. "First, the papers." From inside his coat, Porter produced a document, a simple bill of sale, transferring guardianship of Rebecca Morgan to Victor Caldwell's establishment until her labor satisfied the debt. "Bill of sale?" Becca finally broke her silence. "I'm not property to be sold." Porter smiled coldly. "My dear, in this world, everything and everyone has a price. Your father simply found yours." As Walter reached for the quill, a movement at his elbow sent Caldwell's jacket swinging open. A small black notebook tumbled from his inner pocket, landing half open in the dust. Caldwell cursed and stooped quickly to retrieve it, but not before Becca's perfect memory captured a glimpse of its contents. A list of women's names, figures, dollars, and locations. One name leaped out at her: Catherine. Next to it, the notation, St. Louis, 1863. Catherine, her mother's name. The year she disappeared. The world seemed to tilt. Before she could process it, a commotion at the edge of the crowd drew their attention. The onlookers parted as a newcomer approached, a tall man with the quiet, dangerous air of a predator. Silas Winters stopped a few paces from the steps, his pale eyes taking in the scene. He wore buckskins and carried a rifle. The scar that ran from his temple to his jaw tightened as he frowned. "Selling women now, Morgan?" His voice was low, but it carried in the sudden silence. Walter flushed. "Mind your business, Winters." "I'd say the sale of a person in broad daylight makes it everyone's business." Silas shifted his gaze to Becca, then to Caldwell and Porter. Something like recognition flashed in his eyes when they fell on the colonel. Porter stiffened. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "No pleasure in it," Silas replied. He dropped a sack of furs onto the porch. "What's the price?" Caldwell looked confused. "For the girl? She's already spoken for." "I'm asking anyway." Porter studied Silas, his expression calculating. "The debt is $150, Mr. Winters." Silas nudged the furs with his boot. "Prime beaver and mink. Worth 200 at least." Becca stared at this strange man, this unexpected interruption. His eyes were pale blue, almost silver, and they held an intensity that missed nothing. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much. "Mr. Winters," Porter said carefully, "I don't believe you understand. Miss Morgan is to be employed at the Golden Spike." "I understand perfectly." Silas's gaze never wavered. "I'm offering to clear the debt. What she does after that is her choice." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Her choice?" Caldwell repeated, bemused. "Women don't get choices, Winters. They get told." Silas stepped closer, his voice dropping so only those on the porch could hear. "I've got a cabin up in the hills. She can stay there till she figures out where she wants to go. I'll sleep in the storehouse." He turned to Becca directly. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But don't come back to Deadwood. It's not safe for women alone." Becca's breath caught. The stranger was offering her freedom, not ownership. In his pale eyes she saw no lust, no greed, only a quiet determination she couldn't fathom. "What's your angle, Winters?" Franklin finally asked. Silas kept his attention on Becca. "Your choice," he repeated. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her a choice. "I'll go with Mr. Winters," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Porter's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure that's wise, Miss Morgan. Do you know this man?" "Better a stranger with honest intentions than men whose plans for me are all too clear," Becca replied. "Honest intentions?" Caldwell scoffed. "A man living alone in the hills, taking in a young woman? There's nothing honest about that." "Says the man who runs a brothel," Silas countered evenly. Caldwell's face darkened. "The Golden Spike is a respectable establishment." "Then why do so many of your respectable girls end up dead in the woods?" The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Porter stepped forward. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Winters." "It's not an accusation. It's a question." Silas didn't back down. "One that's been bothering me for some time." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Whatever was happening here went far beyond a simple debt. Porter broke the silence with a forced laugh. "I believe we've strayed from the matter at hand. Mr. Morgan, if you're satisfied with Mr. Winters's offer, then I see no reason to prolong this." Walter hesitated, then nodded. "The furs cover the debt." "With interest," Porter confirmed, though his eyes remained on Silas. "Though I do wonder why a man like you is so invested in this girl's welfare." Silas gathered his rifle. "Someone needs to be." The papers were signed, the furs accepted as payment. Through it all, Becca stood silent. As they prepared to leave, Porter caught Silas's arm. "We've met before, haven't we, Mr. Winters?" "Don't believe so," Silas replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I never forget a face." Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes, especially one with such a distinctive scar. Silas pulled his arm free. "Lot of scarred men in these parts, Colonel." "Indeed. Well, safe travels, Mr. Winters. The hills can be dangerous this time of year. All manner of predators about." The threat was unmistakable. Silas merely nodded and guided Becca down the steps, away from the Golden Spike, away from her family, away from the life that had almost been forced upon her. The crowd parted for them. Becca didn't look back. Her mind was racing. Catherine, St. Louis, 1863. Could it really be her mother? After all these years, was this the first real clue? They rode out of Deadwood in silence, Becca seated behind Silas on his horse. The trail climbed steadily into the Black Hills. The air grew cooler, the pine scent stronger. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked. "Buy my debt." Silas was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Seen too many girls sold like that," he finally said. "Seen what becomes of them after." "The women in the woods," Becca guessed. "You found them?" He nodded once, his jaw tightening. "How many?" "7 now." The simple answer chilled her. Not a few or several, a precise count. 7 women discarded like trash. "In the notebook," she said suddenly, "the one Caldwell dropped. I saw a name. Catherine. St. Louis, 1863. She felt Silas tense. "My mother's name was Catherine. She disappeared in St. Louis in 1863. Silas reined the horse to a stop, turning to study her face. "You saw that in the split second before he picked it up?" "Yes, I remember everything I see, word for word, image for image. It's why my father thought I was unnatural." "Nothing unnatural about a sharp mind," Silas said, urging the horse forward again. "Might be useful, in fact." "For what?" "Finding the truth." They continued in silence, the trail growing steeper. Eventually, the trees opened onto a small plateau. A half-finished cabin stood in a natural clearing. "It's not much," Silas said, helping her down. "Been working on it when I can." Becca took in the rustic dwelling, the surrounding forest, the distant view of the valleys beyond. After the chaos of the morning, the peaceful isolation was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said simply. Silas looked uncomfortable. No need for thanks. Just did what needed doing. He gestured to the cabin. You can go in, doors not locked. The interior was sparse but orderly. A stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a narrow bed covered with a patchwork quilt, and on a shelf, an unexpected treasure: books. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine, and faintly of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Bed's yours, Silas said when he came inside. I'll sleep in the storehouse. Thank you, but I couldn't. Wasn't a negotiation. His tone was firm but not unkind. Nights get cold up here. Becca bristled slightly. I'm not fragile, Mr. Winters. A ghost of something, perhaps amusement, flickered across his face. Never said you were, but you've had a hard day. Bed's yours. He moved efficiently around the small space, lighting a lamp, building a fire. Can you cook? He asked. Yes. He nodded toward a shelf. Got some rabbit from yesterday. Potatoes in the bin. Make yourself at home. With that, he stepped outside, leaving her alone. Becca stood still for a moment, absorbing the sudden change in her circumstances. This morning she was destined for the golden spike. Now she was miles from Deadwood in a stranger's cabin, but she wasn't serving a saloon full of leering faces. And she had a clue, the first real lead to what might have happened to her mother, and somehow she sensed that Silas Winters might be the key to understanding it all. The next few days established a quiet routine. Silas would rise before dawn and disappear into the forest. Becca would wake to find coffee already brewing. They worked together to prepare the cabin for winter, stacking firewood, chinking gaps in the walls. He was a patient teacher, treating her intelligence as a given, not a surprise. For Becca, this simple respect was more valuable than the shelter he provided. On the third day, as they worked to complete the half-finished wall, Silas asked about her memory. It's like everything I see gets painted into my mind, she explained. Words, faces, scenes, they stay there, perfect. Useful skill, Silas observed. Not according to my father. He said it was unnatural. She handed him another log. My mother taught me to read in secret. After she disappeared, I kept teaching myself. And the notebook. Silas paused his work. You're sure it said Catherine St. Louis, 1863? Positive. There were other names, too. Elizabeth, Sarah, Mary, each with a price and a location. Silas was silent for a long moment. Then, almost casually, he said, I knew a Catherine once, in St. Louis. Becca's heart leaped. When? 13 years ago. I was a policeman. He looked up, meeting her eyes. She came to the station, said she had information about missing women, girls disappearing from certain establishments. What happened to her? Becca's voice was a whisper. Don't know. She was supposed to return the next day with evidence. Never did. Silas's expression darkened. A week later, I was taken off the case. You think it was my mother? Can't say for certain, but the timing fits. The implications hung between them like storm clouds. My father, she said slowly. You think he was involved? Silas's gaze was measuring. What do you think? Becca closed her eyes, forcing herself to sift through memories. The night before her mother vanished. Raised voices, her father's angry shouts, words she hadn't understood then. Blood money. Those poor girls. I'll go to the police. I think he knew something, she admitted. I think he was involved, and when she threatened to expose it, she became a liability. Like the women I found in the hills, Silas said quietly. The truth was a bitter pill. Her own father, complicit in her mother's death. But a part of her had always suspected it, had always felt the wrongness of his explanations, his lack of grief. I need to know, she said, even if it's terrible. Silas nodded, understanding in his pale eyes. Truths, often terrible, but lies are worse. They fester. That evening, Becca found the courage to ask, Who are you really, Silas Winters? Why are you tracking these women? Silas stared into the fire. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew the folded note from the dead woman in the woods. Remember St. Louis, he read aloud. It's a message, not for her, for me. From who? Porter, most likely. His face hardened. 5 years ago, I was a detective in St. Louis. Started noticing a pattern, young women disappearing. I was getting close, had names, dates. Then one night, I came home late from following a lead. His voice roughened. The house was in flames. Hannah and Lily inside. The door had been barricaded from the outside. Hannah and Lily? Becca asked softly. My wife and daughter. The words were laden with grief. It was a warning. Back off. The department shut down my investigation the next day. Said I was too personally involved. When I kept digging, they forced me out. So you came here to continue your investigation. Followed the trail. These operations move, but the men behind them stay the same. Took me 2 years to trace it to Deadwood. Caldwell is just a middleman. The real power is higher up. Colonel Porter, Becca said with certainty. Silas's gaze sharpened. What makes you so sure? The way he carried himself. The deference Caldwell showed him. And something my father said about owing a debt to the colonel. He seemed terrified. The pieces were fitting together, forming a picture darker than Becca had ever imagined. The notebook, she said, as Silas prepared to retire to the storehouse. We need to get it back, for proof. No, his voice was firm. Too dangerous. Porter already suspects who I am, if he connects us. He didn't finish. The image of his family trapped in a burning house hung between them. We'll find another way, he promised. But Becca knew she couldn't just hide in the hills. Her perfect memory was a tool, perhaps even a weapon. She just needed to figure out how to use it. On the 5th day, she found the letters. Silas had gone hunting, expecting to be gone until dusk. While cleaning, she moved his trunk. It wasn't fully latched. Inside, beneath folded clothes, was a flat wooden box. She shouldn't have opened it, but she did. Inside was a stack of letters, all addressed in the same careful hand. My dearest Hannah. They had never been sent. Her conscience screamed at her, but her eyes snagged on the words. The cabin is coming along. Lily would be 7 now. I wonder if she'd still want to be a doctor. Remember how she used to bandage her dolls? Found another one today? Young, maybe 20. I buried her with the others. That makes 5. How many more before I find who's responsible? I dream of you both every night. In the dreams, I'm always running toward our house. But no matter how fast I go, the flames are faster. Shame washed over her. These weren't letters. They were a private ritual of grief. She was carefully replacing them when a sound at the door made her whirl around. Silas stood in the doorway, a string of rabbits in one hand. His eyes moved from her guilty face to the trunk. Found what you were looking for? His voice was quiet, dangerous. I was cleaning, she stammered, then stopped. Lies were useless. I saw the box, and I read them. I'm sorry. She braced herself for his anger. Instead, his shoulders sagged. Doesn't matter, he said finally. They're just words on paper. Won't bring them back. The resignation in his voice was worse than anger. It's not just words, she said, stepping forward. It's memory. It's keeping them alive the only way you can. He looked at her sharply, as if seeing something new. You understand that? I've spent 13 years trying to remember every detail about my mother. Her voice caught. Some days I'm afraid I'll forget something, and then it will be like losing her all over again. Something softened in his expression. Hannah used to sing to Lily at night, he said, his gaze distant. Sometimes, up here, when the wind's right, I think I can still hear it. The confession hung between them, intimate and painful. That night, a savage storm broke, keeping them confined to the cabin. As the wind howled, they sat at the table, a map of the territory spread between them. We need to get to the federal marshal in Rapid City, Silas said. He's an honest man. Not in Porter's pocket. With your memory of that notebook, we might have enough to convince him. The plan was simple. The journey was not. Just as they were finalizing their route, A sound from outside froze them. The crunch of footsteps. Silas grabbed his rifle, motioning for Becca to stay low. A voice called out, "Winters, it's Ezra! Don't shoot an old man for bringing news!" An elderly black man stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. "Bit jumpy today, aren't you?" he observed as Silas approached. "Careful, not jumpy," Silas corrected. "What brings you up this way?" "News that couldn't wait." Ezra's eyes, sharp and alert, took in Becca. "Morgan's daughter?" Silas nodded. "Come inside." Over coffee, Ezra told his story. "Found another girl yesterday down by Whitewood Creek, throat cut." Silas went very still. "Made an example of her. Pinned a note to her dress. This is what happens to runaways." "A message," Silas said, a muscle working in his jaw. "For anyone thinking of leaving the Golden Spike," Ezra agreed. "And maybe for you too." "How do you know all this?" Becca asked. A shadow passed over Ezra's face. "Lost my daughter to men like Porter 20 years ago. In St. Louis. She disappeared. Never found her. Never got answers." Understanding dawned. "That's why you helped Silas. Been watching Porter's operation since he came to Deadwood. Counting the girls who vanish. Waiting for a chance to bring him down." He then pulled out a 3-day-old newspaper. "There's something else." He pointed to a small article. "Colonel Porter announces railroad investment." "Porter's bringing in Eastern investors," Ezra explained. "Planning a spur line to Deadwood. Means more money, more influence." "And more girls brought in," Silas said darkly. "And more shipments going out." "There's a meeting tomorrow night," Ezra continued. "At the Grand Central Hotel. Porter, the investors, territorial officials, they're finalizing the arrangements." Silas and Becca exchanged a glance. With Porter occupied, the Golden Spike might be vulnerable. The notebook might be accessible. "Dangerous thinking," Ezra observed. "We need that notebook," Silas said simply. "It's the proof we need." "And it might contain my mother's name," Becca added. Ezra's eyes widened slightly. "Catherine Morgan? From St. Louis? I was working the riverboats then. Word was she was asking questions about missing girls. Then she disappeared. Some said she'd been silenced." "Same pattern," Silas said quietly. "Investigation, discovery, elimination." Ezra looked at Becca with new understanding. "You're trying to finish what your mother started." "Yes," she said, the word carrying 13 years of weight. Ezra nodded, a decision forming in his dark eyes. "Then I'll help you get that notebook." The plan was set. Ezra would create a diversion near the hotel. Silas and Becca would slip into the Golden Spike. As Ezra prepared to leave, he handed Becca a small, sheathed knife. "Just in case," he said. "Sometimes a woman's best defense is something they don't see coming." The next evening, they met Ezra at the old miners' cemetery. He provided disguises, a simple dress for Becca, a miner's jacket for Silas. At exactly 9 o'clock, shouts erupted from the main street. A wagon was on fire. Ezra's diversion. They slipped into the Golden Spike's back entrance. Caldwell's office was upstairs, locked. Silas worked his magic with a set of small tools, and they were in. The safe was hidden behind a painting. Silas knelt, his ear pressed to the metal, manipulating the dial. Becca searched the desk, finding a ledger detailing the trafficking operation, but not the comprehensive record they needed. "Silas," she whispered. Just then, the safe clicked open. Inside was cash, documents, and a small black leather-bound book. The notebook. Becca's hands trembled as she took it. She flipped through the pages, her memory capturing everything. It was all there. Names, dates, locations going back 15 years. Then she found it. Catherine Morgan, 1863. Eliminated. Threat to operation. Her heart stuttered. Eliminated. The clinical coldness of the word chilled her to the bone. "She's in here," she whispered. "My mother." "Hannah and Lily?" Silas's voice was tight. She flipped forward. Hannah Winters, 1871, eliminated with child, security measure against SW investigation. It was all there. A history of murder and corruption bound in black leather. Just as they were about to leave, footsteps approached the office. A key rattled in the lock. Silas raised his revolver. The door started to open, then stopped. "Caldwell!" a voice called from down the hall. "Porter needs you at the Grand Central, now!" "What for?" Caldwell's voice replied. "Something about the investors getting nervous." "Fine. Tell them I'm coming." The door closed. The footsteps receded. They had been saved by a matter of seconds. They slipped out, leaving no trace, and met Ezra behind the blacksmith shop. "Got what you needed?" the old man asked. "Everything," Silas said, patting his jacket. But just as they were about to ride for Rapid City, shouts erupted from the Golden Spike. "They found your handiwork," Ezra said grimly. "Time to go." "I'll lead them off," Ezra offered, mounting a third horse. "Head east. Meet you at Hollister's." Before they could protest, he was gone, deliberately making noise to draw attention. "Brave old man," Silas murmured. "Let's make his distraction count." They rode hard through the darkness. The notebook was their salvation and their death warrant. By dawn, they had put 20 miles between themselves and Deadwood. But as they stopped to rest the horses, they heard it. The distant sound of hoofbeats. "Porter's men," Silas said grimly. They saw through the diversion. The trail ahead split. "We need to separate," Silas said, making a swift decision. "I'll lead them west. You continue to Rapid City, with the notebook." "No," Becca protested. "We stay together." "You have the evidence," he insisted. "If we both get caught, it's all for nothing." He pressed the notebook into her hands. "Tell Hollister everything. If I'm not there by noon tomorrow, find Ezra." His eyes held hers for 1,000 unspoken words. Then he leaned across and pressed his lips to her forehead. "Go," he whispered. "Be safe." Before she could respond, he wheeled his horse onto the western trail and rode hard, drawing their pursuers away. Becca hesitated for only a moment, then spurred her horse toward Rapid City, the notebook clutched in her hand, her heart torn in two. Becca rode with a desperation she didn't know she possessed. The shouts of Porter's men grew louder behind her, a relentless baying pack. But ahead, on the horizon, were the first buildings of Rapid City, civilization, safety. If she could just make it. Her horse was tiring. The riders were closing in. "Help!" she screamed at a wagon she passed. "Men are chasing me! Get the marshal!" Some stared. Others spurred their own horses on, wanting no part of her trouble. But one rider, a young man on a spirited black horse, wheeled around. "What's happening?" he shouted. "Porter's men from Deadwood," she gasped. "I have evidence. Need Marshal Hollister." The young man's expression hardened. "Follow me. I know a shortcut." He led her through a maze of alleys, emerging near the marshal's office. "Jim Miller," he said, helping her dismount. "My father's the deputy. Get inside. I'll warn them." Becca staggered up the steps and into the office, the notebook clutched in her hand. A weathered man looked up from his desk. "Miss Morgan? Where's Winters?" "Led them away," she gasped. "But they're coming." "Miller!" Hollister yelled to his deputy. "Get some men! Porter's thugs are in town!" He guided Becca to a chair. "What happened?" With trembling hands, she placed the notebook on his desk. "Evidence," she said. "Proof of everything. The trafficking, the murders, including what happened to my mother, and to Silas's family." Hollister picked it up cautiously. "This is Caldwell's record?" "Yes. Names, dates, locations, going back 15 years. A commotion erupted outside. The deputy burst back in. "Marshal, Porter's men are outside. 4 of them." Hollister locked the notebook in his desk. "Stay here, Miss Morgan." The front window exploded inward as a shot rang out. Becca dove to the floor as Hollister and his deputy returned fire. The gunfight was brief, but intense. Then silence. "Got 2 of them," the deputy reported. Others ran. Hollister helped Becca to her feet. "You all right?" She nodded. "Yes, but Silas." "We'll find him," Hollister promised. "Right now." We need to get you somewhere safe. Porter won't stop with one attempt. He was right. As long as Porter was free, they were all in danger. Just as they were leaving, Ezra arrived, dust-covered and weary. "You made it," he said, relief washing over his face. "So did you," Becca replied, "but Silas is still out there." "I might know where to look," Ezra said, his voice grave. "Porter has a private cabin outside Deadwood. If they caught Silas, that's where they'd take him." Within the hour, Marshal Hollister had assembled a posse. Becca insisted on going. "He risked everything for me," she said. "I won't abandon him now." They rode hard, reaching a vantage point above the cabin as dusk fell. 2 of Porter's men lay dead outside. The rest had fled, but Porter was gone. Inside, they found a room that had been used as a prison. Cut ropes, bloodstains on the floor, and on a table, a note addressed to her. "Miss Morgan," it read, "if you wish to see Mr. Winters alive again, bring the notebook to the abandoned mine at Black Rock Canyon by midnight tomorrow. Come alone. Any deviation will result in his immediate execution. Regards, Colonel Harlan Porter." "It's a trap," Ezra declared. "Of course it is," Hollister agreed. "He knows the notebook is in my hands. He wants her." "But Silas is alive," Becca said, clinging to that one fact. "Or he's just using him as bait," Hollister cautioned. But in another room, Becca found a map. Black Rock Canyon was marked in red ink. "We have to go," she said. "If we move now, we might catch them off guard." They rode through the night, reaching the abandoned mine near midnight. It was an ambush. Gunfire erupted from the darkness of the mine entrance. Hollister and his men returned fire, pinning the gunmen down. Then, new shots rang out from inside the mine, directed inward. Shouts, curses, and then an eerie silence. A voice called out, weak but unmistakable, "Marshal, that you?" "Silas!" Becca screamed, running toward the mine. He was swaying in the entrance, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Behind him, 4 of Porter's men lay dead or dying. "Got a little delayed," he managed, a grim smile on his battered face before he collapsed. They found out later he'd had a derringer hidden in his boot. He'd waited for his moment and created enough confusion for Porter's men to start shooting each other in the dark. "Where's Porter?" Hollister demanded as they tended to Silas's wounds. "Gone," Silas rasped. "Left for Montana hours ago. He has connections in Helena." The journey back was a blur. A grizzled trapper named Harkins stitched Silas's knife wound, saving his life. 3 days later, they were back in Rapid City. Judge Harmon had successfully arrested Caldwell and the others in Deadwood. The trafficking operation was finished, but Porter was still free. "He won't get far," the judge assured them. "Every marshal from here to the Pacific is looking for him. We've frozen most of his assets." "Most, but not all," Silas said grimly. For Becca and Silas, the future was unwritten. The wounds of the past would never fully heal. But as they stood in the small house Hollister had arranged for them, something new had begun to take root. "The cabin's still there," Silas said, his hand finding hers. "Needs work. That west wall was never quite right." It wasn't a proposal. It was an open door. And for Becca, who had been raised in a world where women were property, it was perfect. "I've always wanted to learn more about carpentry," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. In the end, it wasn't just about vengeance. It was about rebuilding. Not just a cabin wall, but 2 lives, shattered by the same storm. The value of freedom, they had both learned, lay not in the absence of chains, but in the presence of choice. And for the first time, the future held choices worth making. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of justice and redemption. What do you think is a stronger motivator, love or revenge? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the wild corners of history.